Welcome again to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises. I'm Jon Paulien, and I'm from Loma School of Religion. And next to me is Shifra Fepuleai, and she is a pastor at the Campus Hill Seventh-day Adventist Church. And then Philip Milosavljevic he's pastor at the Loma Linda University Church, and Vianna Chambers with the Calimesa Seventh-day Adventist Church. And they are all working with younger people. And I think one of the prophetic surprises I look forward to every time we do this program is just getting a different perspective from a younger generation. Book of Revelation will never mean to the younger generation what it means to many of us in my generation. And I want to learn on that, and I'm sure that in our audience there are many who will find that to be a valuable perspective. So it's good to be back together with you.
Absolutely.
And I thought we ought to pick up on where we left off last week, and that is that we went from the 7 trumpets to the cross. And when the camera went off, Philip turns to me and says, how did we do that anyway? I want to get all that. And I realized that probably we didn't cover all the bases. So let's go back.
Okay.
And we've been looking at the seven thunders of Revelation 10, verses 3 and 4. Let's go back to John 12. And in John 12, let's go to verse 23. Jesus replied, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." All right? Well, what does it mean in John to be glorified? "I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds." And so clearly in the Gospel of John, and this is true in many texts, not just this one, but I didn't give the full context last week, that the death of Christ is his glorification. That on the cross is the clearest picture of the character of Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ is the clearest picture of the Father. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So the cross truly is the glorification of Jesus. Now, going back to verses 28 through 30, when Jesus reiterates this glory idea, thunder occurs. The voice of God thunders. And that's exactly what we saw in chapter 10 of Revelation, the 7 thunders. Thunders are appearances of God throughout the Old Testament. So you have at the cross an appearance of God. You look at the cross and you see a human being, but it is actually a theophany, an appearance of God. And the glory of God is in his character. God has infinite power. That's what the thunders represent. Yet he exercises it from the perspective of a cross. That's not the kind of power human beings are used to. It is a power exercised with velvet gloves. It's a power that seeks to persuade rather than to coerce. And that makes the cross the mightiest act of God, even mightier than creation, mightier than the Exodus. All of these revealed God's character, but the cross reveals it ever so much more. So that's the little secret surprise to the 7 thunders is that it's a reminder of Psalm 29, the infinite power of God, and a reminder of the cross in which God's infinite power is exercised with grace, kindness, and complete freedom. Surprise.
Yeah.
God's
cool.
prophetic surprises. So, shall we, anything else on the 7 thunders, or shall we go on?
So then if I were to just summarize then what you're pointing to, you first jumped to Psalms 29, and you reiterated this idea of the 7 thunders are actually somewhere else in
They're
Scripture.
actually there, yeah.
And it's the voice of God. And then you took us to Revelation 12.
John
and
12.
John 12.
Yeah.
Sorry, John 12.
And the voice of God comes there.
The voice of God coming through this glory, because it said the Son of Man must be glorified and glorifying you again. And so it's this idea of the picture of the cross because John finds that to be the most significant space. But now, how do we know that glory is this very glory that's here? Because he says, here, let's seal it up. Why would the cross and the grace of God need to be sealed up? Why would he want to hide that? I know I'm pushing back on this one.
No, that's good.
But
that's
I mean,
good.
it would seem like, hey, if this is that thing, why would you seal it up? If it was the cross, you want everyone to know. Or could there be somewhere else that this might come down the road and he brings it out more clearly as we get through into Revelation?
Well, you remember the clouds were a hiding of God's glory. We saw the clouds earlier in chapter 10. And God uses them to veil his glory because while his glory is completely life-giving, in the presence of sin and rebellion, it can be destructive. God does not, destruction, violence, wrath is not essential to God's character. These are reactive, that in the context of sin, in the context of rebellion, God's glory turns into something else. And it is not because God's glory is defective. It's because human beings in sin and rebellion are defective, and the glory becomes like a consuming fire. So God does not choose to destroy the wicked. In a sense, they destroy themselves because the soul that sins, what? It will die.
Yeah.
You know, in the day that you eat of this fruit, you will surely come to death, it says to Adam and Eve. So death is the natural consequence of sin because it separates you from the life-giving glory of God.
Yeah.
So Jesus Christ on the cross was not killed by the Father. His life was taken ultimately more than the Romans, more than the religious authorities. His life was taken by sin.
So we're saying that it was sealed up, if this is the cross, the glory on the cross, because it would have been a glory that was like a consuming fire. Is that what we're saying?
And so what I would see in the seven trumpets is God had planned to do something dramatic. And then he delayed. You know, you have the whole idea of the delay of the Advent. That's a constant theme through the New Testament. I would see that taking place here. God was going to do something magnificent, but we weren't ready.
It was going to be destructive. Should we receive it?
Perhaps, yeah. And what we will see in verses 5 and 6, that the focal point there is the concluding of Daniel's time prophecies. And one possibility is the seven trumpets would have curtailed that. It would have said, I don't need to wait that long, let's finish this thing up. But, and if that's the case, maybe those time prophecies would just never have been finalized, yeah.
So how do we know these seven thunders aren't like representative of another seven, like the seven churches?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think that's clearly what they were. God was intending another, but for whatever reason, didn't happen. And perhaps we should go to Jeremiah chapter 17, because that states in principle what I think we are talking about here. And don't hesitate to push back. If you don't, some email from a listener will do exactly that, right? So Jeremiah 18, verses 7 through 10. If at any time I announce that a nation or a kingdom is to be uprooted, torn down, and destroyed, and if that nation I warned repents of its evil, then I will relent and not inflict on it the disaster I had planned. And if at another time I announce that a nation or kingdom is to be built up and planted, and if it does evil in my sight and does not obey me, then I will reconsider the good I intended to do for it. What that tells me is that God is deeply engaged with history. God's deeply engaged with us in the sense that what we decide matters. Our choices matter. You know, when God created us, he limited his freedom. Think about that. When God created us with the ability to create children, he gave us a choice. when to have children, how many, etc. We have creative power. Every time we exercise that, that's a choice God doesn't have.
So
That's
my
a choice He
gap-
gave to us.
Yeah.
It's an incredible gift.
So my gap is not so much the concept that God can't relent, right? We see in Jonah.
Yeah.
Jonah goes to Nineveh, gives a clear prophecy. There's no conditions in his words.
Yeah.
And then they repent and they bet their lives on a what if God, right, would be merciful essentially. And God is indeed merciful. So my concept, pushback isn't really on that God will relent. It's more so like, where do we get that in verse 4 of chapter 10, this sealing up is because God is relenting versus, say, for example, just another example of they're not ready for this. It's not the time, or it's not their business. Stay in your own lane, or this is such a sacred moment between the voice of the one who roars like a lion and the seven thunders that it is not to be documented. Kind of like in those moments where, can you just leave your phones? Phones are not allowed. No record
Yeah.
button allowed, because this is such a reverent moment. Like, how do we know
So these are
what this
secrets
is?
that are not to be revealed.
This? Okay.
Yeah.
We know for sure it's sealing up, but we don't know why. So I'm just lost. How
I mean,
do we get to
I wonder if it's
land and
allowed.
relent?
I wonder if it's allowed that we jump all the way to verse 7, because you see here almost that it is sounded by the seventh angel, the mystery of God would be fulfilled. So it's like something is going to be revealed, but just not right now. So maybe that's what you were driving at
Yeah,
earlier,
I agree with
that
that.
there was a space for hiddenness, but the revealing will come.
It's a delay in God's revelation, a delay in the second coming, in God's action,
How do
etc.
we know it's a delay and not
We don't.
just okay?
We don't.
Okay.
I read the 300 pages of
Good work.
the lady who wrote a 300-page book on the seven trumpets.
Yeah.
Okay, I read that book, and it just seemed like jumping from one thing to another in leaps of logic, and in the end, I didn't feel like I'd learned anything beyond. So the reality is, what do we know about the seven thunders? We know that it existed, and we know that we don't know anything about them because it wasn't written down.
And John died with his secret.
Yeah.
Can I react emotionally? So
Okay.
I just want to reflect some emotions here. So, because very intellectual conversation. Verse 3 and 4, leading to 5 and 6, which we should get into pretty soon. It makes me feel wonder and awe. I know that I'm standing in I'm reading a majestic scene. It's loud, right, guys?
The roaring lion.
The roaring lion. I almost, because I'm a cultural being, as we all are, I kind of parallel this quickly in my cultural heritage to like the haka, you know, right? Because
Yes.
it's like this roaring of power and this might and several loud, thunderous voices, and it's a very reverent moment. And then in comes the voice of heaven, which I know has to be different from the mighty angel, because it's almost like an interruption in the scene. And it's to be sealed up. The things that it says, don't write them down. So I just personally, as a cultural being reading this, of course not intertextually, I get the sense of sheer reverence. What do you guys, how do you reflect?
Well, I have a big ego.
Right. Okay.
So I read this and I'm like, I'm miffed. Like, how dare you? Like, what did I do? Like, why are you keeping this from me? Like, what is it about me that like you would have to seal it up? Like, I take it personally. That's just because I have a big ego.
No.
Oh, brother, get out of here.
Our generation has like phrases for that, right? Like stay in your lane. Or like fear of missing out. We don't want to miss out on that. So I get it.
I mean, I don't see it as a big ego, Viana. I mean, I just see that, hey, this is the curious mind's desire. I mean, you are a very thoughtful, smart woman, and you're like eager to see, like, God, what are you about to reveal here? What is it that you don't want me to know? Am I not capable of understanding this? Am I not capable of taking it. And I think that's more so where I land. It's like, he does not feel as though we need it at this moment in time. Hence when Daniel says, hey, seal it up for a time will come when they will need to know. What benefit would it have been for the people of God for these 1,000 years or more from when Daniel heard it to now the last 200?
But see, I deal with children, and the moment you say, I have a surprise for you, they will not get it out of their minds until you show it to them, and they will feel butthurt. I said but. They will feel so hurt. Like, I'm not forgetting my surprise. So it's like, just don't say it at all, and you will forego the misery of having to have a little child nagging behind you.
That's a good point.
So like, why even?
I mean, I almost think about it in the sense that the Bible.
That's helpful.
That
It was
is
helpful because I've been hearing these words relent, I've been hearing the word delay, and I'm like, who says it's delaying? But perhaps in the experience of the one who isn't in on it, the revelation is delayed in that sense. But in my mind, objectively, it's just like an oven that hasn't like fully cooked what's inside of it. So just hang on, kid, the cookies are not yet ready, right?
I like that. I like that.
That's just how
Okay,
I
more
see
so
it.
in that
So
sense.
then like your delay is your delight, right?
Okay.
That's right.
Okay. I mean, I thought.
Speaking of surprises, I had no idea where they were going.
Surprise.
All right,
man,
good
that
stuff.
was good.
Good stuff.
That was good.
Yeah, but why don't we put a positive spin on this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because when God withholds information, what is our part in that? We get to think for ourselves.
Yikes.
If he doesn't spell out, you've got to think exactly this way, he says, no, I'm gonna leave them free to work this out for themselves. I mean, a lot of people say, you know, all through the Bible, you've got these prophets speaking for God, and they open everything up and make it all so clear. Why don't we have prophets today? Maybe because we've grown up enough that God's trusting us to think for ourselves. I mean, that's what happens when your kids grow up, you let them think for themselves. My kids have grown up, so I learned that from experience, that you'd better let them think for themselves. But that's what maturity is all about. You come to the place where you think and wrestle and try to make sense of things. And in that process, you continue growing.
It's that whole marinating idea where you're like just soaking up flavor the longer you stay in it. Like that makes more sense.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But your idea of saying surprise to the kids and not showing them that, I get the hurt.
Yeah.
And you have expressed well the pain of a lot of readers of Revelation through the centuries that just came to this passage and says, come on. It was just getting good, and now you're going to just slam the door on me, you see?
Yeah.
And I guess the good news of all of that is every one of us will have at least one question for God when we come into the eternity regarding what we have studied in Revelation. Why on earth did you do that? And did God warn Jonah that the Assyrians might repent? He didn't. Jonah was kind of hurt, right? You sandbagged me here. You sent me into this vicious, mean place, and I gave the scariest message I've ever preached, and then
Surprise.
you abandoned me. You surprised me. God's prophetic surprise. Yeah.
literally.
Surprise. I'm not going to do it. I think that's a little bit of what we're seeing here. And while we might be disappointed, the only reason a parent would withhold a surprise is if they came to realize maybe this surprise wouldn't be good for them. You know?
Yeah.
Just following the analogy.
Or better later down the road.
Ultimately,
That's how I see it more so.
yeah.
I'll
Ultimately, the
wait till
question.
you finish your tantrum, and then we'll show you.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But ultimately, the question is, what kind of God do we have? If God can be trusted, then we can trust his silence as well as his
Mercy.
positive words. You know?
Good.
So coming
You're
to a
right.
conclusion about who God is and what kind of God we serve. And that's where the cross comes in. Right? We serve a God who refuses to intimidate, refuses to coerce, and just says, I'm looking for your free will response in love. to me and to each other. That's all I'm asking, you see. And when you truly know what that means, loving God and loving other people, you keep all the commandments.
Amen.
You know, it all boils down to that. Well, let's go to verses 5 and 6, because I think we've kind of sucked all the juice out of the 7 thunders there might be. And I'm not saying that John 12 and Psalm 29 solves them in any way, but it gives us at least a hint that there's still something of value coming out of this, even though it was, quote, withheld from us. It's the recognition that all of God's mighty acts ultimately bring us to an awareness of God's infinite power exercised with lamb-like, beauty.
Yeah. It was a creative approach. I liked it.
Verses 5 and 6.
And the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, the earth and what is in it, the sea and what is in it, that there would be no more delay.
All right, so here finally comes the proclamation of the angel that Viana's been waiting for ever since verse 2.
Yes.
Come on, don't delay on us. All right, what do you guys make of this? Verses 5 and 6, when your initial reaction when you see these verses. Viana, I think we were going to let you do it first this time.
When I hear the words like there will be no more delay, it's like a lie. That's a lie. Because leading up to it, it's like nothing but delay. And then you have these words. So I'm honestly like thoroughly confused. Like, where is this going?
Okay.
It kind of like, it's so abruptly just ends on, right there. There will be no more delay.
So you would add that, I was thinking of a book the other day, Divine Lies in the Bible.
I've never read that.
Never read that book. No, it hasn't been written. No. But I was just thinking, there's a number of places where, at least on the surface, it looks like God is bending the truth a little bit.
Yeah.
How about John chapter 11? Word comes to Jesus, Lazarus is sick. And he says, oh, this sickness is not unto death. Wrong. At least on a surface reading.
Yeah.
So, and there's a number of passages like that. Anyway, what is God doing with passages like that? So you're saying no more delay. Would it encourage you to know that that's a bad translation?
Ooh, surprise.
Intriguing.
Prophetic surprise.
Okay.
Okay.
Praise.
Let's go to the end of chapter 6. What your version says no more delay. What does yours say?
There would be no more delay.
Yeah, there will
And?
be no more
There
delay.
should be delay no longer.
Oh,
Interesting.
And KJV.
So they're all really committed to this delay thing. But that word isn't in the original.
what? Surprise.
So we go to the end of verse 6. The last 3 words of verse 6 are chronos, uketi,
Okay.
estai.
Okay.
Chronos
Time.
is a Greek word from which we get chronology. So it's sequence of time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have moving time, chronos, all right?
Yeah.
Chronos, uketi is no more,
Time will be no more.
or not yet. It could be not yet, or here it may, perhaps more, no more. And then estai is simply is.
Is.
Time is, time will be no more. So it's not saying no more delay. It has the implication of that, but I can see why that word kind of steamed you up a little bit.
Sure did.
Because there seems to be a lot of delays in the Bible.
Yeah.
But that's not exactly, that's a nuance that it's a place you could go, but it might not be exactly what the text is saying. What it's saying is time will be no more.
What kind of time?
Then the
Besides
question is,
chronos.
what kind of time? Now, there was a man about a little less than 200 years ago. His name was William Miller, and he was a farmer in upstate New York, and he was studying his Bible, and he came to this text and he said, time will be no more. And I think the King James actually says exactly that, which is a good translation. Time will be no more. And he said, well, what is that?
It's got to be the end of the world.
Obviously, it's the end.
Yeah.
The clock stops ticking.
End of what?
The world.
Oh.
History. Jesus returns.
Conclusion.
You see? And so William Miller said, this text is the most important text I've ever read. It's telling me that there's going to be a point in time Jesus is going to return, and maybe if I study Daniel and Revelation carefully, I might be able to find out even what exactly that time is. All right? So, time will be no more. What kind of time? Is it history time? Well, was Miller right?
No, we're still here.
We're still here.
Yeah.
Okay? Because he identified that time of this text as October 22, 1844. And 100,000 people in northeastern United States
Including Ellen White.
accepted that message, including a young lady who was Ellen Harmon at the time, accepted that message and went out that evening anticipating that Jesus was about to return, you know. And there was even a big rock in one place behind Miller's farm that some called Ascension Rock, and people are believed to have gone there just waiting to ascend up to Jesus, and he didn't come. Talk about a delay.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a real disappointment.
Wow.
Sure thing.
You see? But it didn't happen. So there's two possibilities. Either he got something wrong about this text, or the text failed. So which one is it? And Miller's conclusion afterward was, I guess it didn't work out. I must have read the text wrong, or maybe it just failed, you know? And I'll just hope for the future. But actually, Miller missed a couple of things in this text. First of all, he missed that in the book of Daniel, the prophecies of Daniel would lead up not to the end, but to what?
Second coming.
Before the end, the time of the end.
Ah.
That Daniel, which this seems to be referring to, as we'll see in the next program, Daniel seems to be looking forward to a period of time called the time of the end, when the book of Daniel will be better understood. And that, I think, is what this is all about here. But William missed that, and he missed one other thing. In verse 7, it says but, and it's a big but. It's, in the Greek, a really hard one that basically says, you know, forget everything I just said. We're moving in another direction. We'll get back to that in our next program. But this is GPS, prophetic surprises every week. God bless you.